Good morning. It's good to see you all. My name's Joel. I'm one of the team here at Church Crawley, one of the curates. It's great amazing to get to gather together and worship as a family, as the church. It's a privilege. It's a real joy. To get to do this every week. It's amazing. So on Sundays here. Oh, sorry, St. Richard's as well. Oh, I even made a note of it so I didn't forget, and I already forgot. Unbelievable. Hello at St. Richard's. Shout out to you guys over there. It's great to be with you guys virtually, digitally as well. It's amazing to be joining you online across the internet. Here at Church Crawley on Sundays, we are on the journey going through the Beatitudes, the 8 or 9, depending how you count them, statements that Jesus makes as he begins his famous teaching, the Sermon on the Mount. This famous, really famous teaching and these Beatitudes sort of almost form a bit of a, kind of like a manifesto of his ministry, his mission, and his kingdom. And we've talked about this kingdom a bit already over the last few weeks, the upside-down kingdom that Jesus brings in. This upside-down kingdom that is so vastly opposite and counter to the culture and the world around us here and now and through all time. This kingdom that is completely countercultural. A couple of weeks ago, as we started off, we looked at what it means to be poor in spirit and why the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who are poor in spirit, those who recognize and acknowledge their desperate need of Jesus. Last week, we talked about how those who mourn are blessed because they will be comforted. And this week, today, we come to Jesus' third statement in the Beatitudes. And so we're going to read the first sort of up to today's Beatitudes. So Matthew 5, 1-5. There we go. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amazing. So we've talked already then about this sort of upside down kingdom, how each of these statements flips some element of the world completely on its head. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Yet we're constantly told that if you believe in yourself, that anything is possible, that you can achieve anything, that the best thing that you can put your confidence in is yourself. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Yet, even if it isn't always explicitly said, we tend to live with this sort of feeling that showing pain, sorrow, suffering, sadness, or any vulnerability is weakness. Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Yet it's impossible for us to miss the countless examples around us of the ways that confidence, assertiveness, aggression, power grabbing, greed, and entitlement seem to be rewarded. The people that inherit the earth, or seem to inherit the earth today, often seem to be the ones with the louder voices, the biggest platforms, the most influence, the most kind of earthly power. But Jesus says something entirely different. Something that flips all of that upside down. Blessed are the meek. Social media has become this sort of giant digital sort of void, a virtual black hole where time doesn't really exist and 5 minutes of scrolling suddenly somehow becomes an hour or 4. It's a place where you are constantly trying to be convinced, won over, influenced, persuaded by somebody's opinion on something, often about relatively harmless things, like the best cookie recipe, that's one that wins me over quite a lot, or the most effective workout routines, that one less so, but also on a much bigger, more impactful topics like politics as well. Somebody on social media is always trying to convince you that they're right about something. Absolutely certain that their way is the best way, is the right way, if not the only way. Social media over the last decade or so has become this place of sort of ever increasingly polarizing views. Because of the way that social media is designed, these algorithms are designed to find what you like and agree with and then just keep on feeding you more of that. And this leads to people becoming more and more self-assured, more closed off to other perspectives, more angry when faced with a conflicting view. But from the very start of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus begins painting a picture of a very different kind of life in a very different kind of kingdom. One that doesn't mirror the world's ways of winning, but God's ways. It's a way that gains not by taking, but by giving. Where power comes not from conquering, but from surrendering. This is what the Beatitudes are all about. They're Jesus' invitation into a higher, better way of living in his kingdom. Life as it's meant to be lived under God's rule and reign. The Beatitudes teach us that in God's kingdom, blessing, the good life, isn't something that you can take by force or by influence. It's not something that you can just conjure up or manifest through self-will or self-belief, or by having your life sort of all together, or by avoiding pain or suffering. The Beatitudes teach us that the path to blessing is through surrender and utter dependence on God. So, why? How? Let's dive in and take a look. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. To understand what Jesus means with this statement, we need to hear this blessing, this statement, the way that his first listeners would have heard it. The crowd that gathered on that hillside in Galilee most likely weren't the powerful or the privileged. They were likely ordinary people, farmers, fishermen, laborers, people living under the shadow and oppression of Roman occupation. Israel had been conquered by the Roman Empire, and they were being oppressed and limited and restricted in their way of life by foreign rulers. When Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth," it's not something that he's just come up with on the spot. He didn't just make it up there and then. He's actually quoting Psalm 37. This, and his listeners probably, almost certainly would have picked up on this straight away because they knew the Psalms so well. Psalm 37 contrasts two different kinds of people. One, those who trust in their own strength, the wicked, the self-assertive, the ones who grasp for power, and those who quietly trust in the Lord, waiting on him, trusting in him, waiting for him to act. This is what it says in Psalm 37, verses 9 to 11. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. A little while and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found, but the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity. And that word prosperity, it's not an earthly, worldly prosperity in the way that we gather together good things and possessions and stuff, but it is prosperity in God's way, goodness, God's goodness. And in that psalm, inherit the land meant receiving the promised land, the place God gives his people. But Jesus takes that promise and expands it. By quoting this psalm, he isn't talking just about a patch of territory in ancient Israel, a patch of land. He's talking about God's new creation, the whole earth, here and now, but also the new creation, his coming kingdom. And he's saying that the meek aren't those who, the meek are those who don't grasp or grab at things, who don't push others aside to get what they want. The meek are those that trust what God has promised he will give. The meek are those that wait on the Lord instead of taking for themselves, taking things into their own hands. And they are those that receive and trust in God to give them what they need instead of seizing and taking for themselves. And that is why this beatitude is such a sort of beautiful paradox. The meek don't take the world by force, they inherit it. It is a gift. They inherit it by faith in God and trust in him. So now let's dig a little bit deeper into this word meek, because it's a word that I was thinking about this the other day. I think I maybe use the word meek 3 or 4 times a year, if that, usually around Christmas, I think, talking about Jesus. But it's a word that we just don't really use in our language today. And so that makes it kind of difficult to really understand what Jesus is saying. And so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to talk about one Greek word and one Hebrew word that are used sort of throughout the Bible. The first one, the Greek word, is the word that Matthew uses here for that word meek. It's what we have translated into meek. And the word is, bear with me, praus, I think. Praus, something like that. And it's the same word that's used elsewhere in the New Testament for gentle, humble, or lowly. But praus, it's not particularly easy to translate into English. Meek is pretty close. It's kind of as close as we can get, but we often confuse meek for weak. We often think meek means sort of quiet and subdued or timid. It's not the easiest word for us to understand. And to get a better grasp, I think, of what it means, it helps to trace it back further into the Old Testament. And so just to go like very slightly nerdy on you for a second, the Hebrew Old Testament in about 300 or 400 BC was translated into Greek. And so there's this Hebrew word we're going to talk about in a second is translated frequently from the Old Testament into this word praus in Greek. And so there's a really close link between these two words. And this Hebrew word is ani. And it means... it's used to mean lots of things, but they're all along the lines of poor, afflicted, humble, lowly. It tends to give this picture of people who would widely have been seen as unimportant. It describes people that have no social power, no influence, the ones that the world overlooks. But it also carries an amazing spiritual depth, because these are the people who depend entirely on God. They know that they don't have what they need. They know that they are lacking, and so they trust in God. They are poor in spirit, fully recognizing their deep need for God. And so I want to look at a couple of examples of how the Old Testament uses this word to help us understand it. First one is Psalm 67. Psalm 76, verses 8 to 9. And this is what it says. From heaven, you, God, pronounced judgment, and the land feared and was quiet. When you, God, rose up to judge, to save all the afflicted, the ani of the land. So here, this word ani refers to the afflicted, people in need of rescuing, people that need saving. The next one, Job 24, 1-4. This is what it says. Why does the Almighty not set times for judgment? Why must those who know him look in vain for such days? There are those who move boundary stones. They pasture flocks they have stolen. They drive away the orphan's donkey and take the widow's ox in pledge. They thrust the needy from the path and force all of the poor, the ani, in the land into hiding. So here again, the ani, they are the vulnerable. They are the people that are oppressed, powerless. People are stealing their donkeys and forcing them to go into hiding out of fear of what might happen to them. Psalm 25:16 says, turn to me and be gracious to me, for I am lonely and afflicted. Afflicted, ani. Here again, they're those that cry out to God because they know they can't save themselves. They need him, so they cry out to him. And then the last one, Isaiah 61. Very well known passage. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, the ani. And this is a passage that Jesus quotes to start his ministry. This is what he is called to. He is the fulfillment of this. And so it's a recognition that the ani are the poor, the meek, the afflicted. They are the ones that Jesus comes to save. As Jesus reads this out, he is declaring that he is sent by God to proclaim that good news to those people. And so when Jesus said, "Blessed are the meek," he's identifying with this really long sort of biblical tradition of the ani, those who have learned to trust God exactly because they have no earthly power to rely on. So that one word, in that one word, meek, we see these sort of two images, kind of like two sides of the same coin. The meek are the afflicted, the broken, the oppressed, who don't put themselves down, but see the truth of who they are in light of who God is. They know their need and dependence on him, and so they know their strength comes from him alone, not from self sort of assertion or self-belief or self-will. They are strong in him, in God, through their weakness. They are strong in him, but submitted and surrendered to his will, to his way. And then Jesus also actually uses that Greek word pros to describe himself in Matthew 11. He says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle, pros, and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." So the same Jesus that calmed a storm with a word, who could command legions of angels if he wished, who had power and authority to heal the sick and to cast out demons, and who went into the temple and turned over the money tables, drove out the animals that were being sold, was also, the same Jesus was also quiet in the face of his accusers as he stood on trial. He refused to defend himself, to prove wrong everyone who doubted him or didn't believe him when he was being accused of blasphemy for saying he was the Son of God. He refused to speak back when they called him a liar. He refused to defend himself when he was abandoned by the people he loved, when he was beaten and mocked and murdered. Jesus was gentle, he was afflicted. He surrendered his will to the Father. He was downtrodden. He was powerful. Jesus is meek. And there's a really amazing image, I think, that helps us to capture this understanding of what meekness is. And it's this idea of sort of tamed a war horse. This war horse that is taken from this wild animal that is incredibly strong, who could easily knock us over. That strong is powerful and wild, but over time is tamed and trained and becomes this incredibly powerful, muscular tool for the rider, capable of incredible force but responsive to its rider's command. Not wild, not weak, but controlled and strong and powerful. That is meekness, is strength surrendered to God, power under control, the kind of strength that Jesus himself lived in and embodied. Not the power to dominate, but the power to obey and to submit to God's will. And this is why this is such a countercultural statement at the time that Jesus was saying it, especially because the Roman Empire, their message was, the ones that will inherit the earth are the ones that are powerful and can take what they need and what they want by force. But that is not what Jesus says. And so, in this kind of balance, we kind of have to find this balance in meekness, between recognizing our weakness, our brokenness, but also not allowing ourselves to become defined by that. And it's in this balance that this is where I struggle. I find it really hard to find that place, that balance in meekness. I'm often very aware of my brokenness and weakness. Very aware, but I struggle to really, from that place, then rest in God's strength. Rather than standing in the boldness and peace of the strength of God, I end up sometimes sort of paralyzed in my weakness, defined by my brokenness. And I know that a big part of that for me has come from things that were sort of spoken over me when I was a kid, when I was growing up, especially at school by sort of different teachers and other pupils. But this really led to me really doubting myself for a lot of my life without a lot of the time really realizing it. And so now my challenge is to really recognize where I'm counting myself out of things. Because I spent so long thinking, oh no, I can't do that. Oh, because of this, that's probably not for me. Because I struggle with that thing, I should leave that to somebody else. And so now, the way that I notice this is something comes up, something needs to be done, a job, a task or whatever, or leading something, and I hesitate because I think, oh no, somebody else can do that. Somebody else would do that better than I can. Somebody else would do a better job. That's not meant for me. And so for me, the lesson that I need to learn is to not forget and ignore my weakness and brokenness because it's there and it's real and we need to acknowledge it. But in that place, to trust in God's strength working in me and through me. To trust that I'm not defined by my weakness, by the things that I struggle with, by the things that my teachers used to say about me. I'm defined by who God says I am and by what he's called me to do. And that doesn't mean that those things won't always just become easy, but it means that God is with me in it and enables me, gives me the strength and power to do the things he's calling me to. And that's my struggle in this, and maybe some of you can relate to that. For some people, it might actually be sort of the opposite, the reverse of that. Maybe you have you're a bit too much reliance on your own skills, your own gifts, your own strengths, to the point where actually you find it hard to recognize your weakness. You find it hard to recognize your lack. And therefore, you find it hard to rely on your dependence on God. This beatitude was, as I said a couple of times already, unbelievably countercultural, both now and when Jesus said it at the time. In the Roman world, land and power were taken by force, by conquest, by violence. Caesar didn't inherit the earth, he claimed it. He went out and took it by marching armies and crushing opposition. In Rome, no one ever said, "Blessed are the meek." That was not their way of life. But Jesus is announcing his kingdom with a different kind of king. Where the world says, assert yourself, Jesus says, surrender yourself to him. Where the world says, climb higher, Jesus says, no, stoop lower, wash each other's feet, follow my lead. Where the world says, hold on tight to what you have and take what you can, Jesus says, let it all go, trust in me. Which is not easy for us to do. We live in a world that prioritizes self-promotion and control. We feel pressure to prove ourselves, to defend ourselves, to be seen as competent and strong and right. And let me just clarify, meekness doesn't mean that you stop caring about truth or justice. It means that you let God be the one who vindicates you. When you are wronged, you don't go after revenge, but you say, God, I trust that you are moving and that your will be done, your way would be made known. It means not that you stop caring about justice, but that you stop trying to play God. You stop being the one to dish out punishment. It's refusing to let pride or fear dictate your actions. To be meek is to live with open hands before God, trusting that he sees, that he knows, trusting in his way completely, trusting he sees all that you're facing, all that you're dealing with and going through, and that he has you in his hands. And so what does it mean when he says that the meek will inherit the earth. We've sort of said it slightly already. The key is inherit. It's not achieve or seize or earn. Inheritance is something that you receive because of relationship, not performance. Psalm 37 says it again and again. Those who trust in the Lord will inherit the land. It's a way of saying God is faithful to his people, to those that follow him. You don't need to fight to get what God has already promised to give. When Jesus picks up on this language from Psalm 37, he's not just talking about this sort of a small patch of Israel like the psalm was talking about. He's speaking about this, the renewal of all creation, the new earth that Revelation 21 talks about. The meek, those who entrust themselves to God, who surrender to him, they will share in that inheritance. They will share in that inheritance of the new heaven, the new earth, when Jesus comes and restores all things to himself. So this meekness and inheriting the earth, it's not just about sort of a personal piece. It's about the hope of God's coming kingdom as well. It's about trusting in all that God is doing, both here and now and in their years to come. When the world says the future belongs to the powerful, Jesus says, no, it belongs to the meek, those that have surrendered to me, those that rely on him fully. Because his kingdom is built not by force or pride or violence, but by faith and surrender. So what does this look like for us? What does this mean for our sort of everyday lives? First of all, it's important to remember meekness starts in the heart. It doesn't start with an action, it starts in our hearts, in how we see ourselves and how we respond to others. It shows up in sort of sometimes quiet, not super obvious ways. In choosing gentleness in our words when we could be sharp, when we're a little annoyed at something, when Rachel, my wife, hasn't packed the dishwasher properly, or in any number of situations. It's choosing gentleness in our words rather than being sharp. It's being, as we read in James chapter 1 in the New Testament, being quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. It's being there to hear people, to listen to what they have to say, rather than as soon as they say something that just gets you up a little bit, jumping on it and shutting it down. And it's trusting God to defend us instead of lashing out. It's the kind of posture that refuses to match the tone of a harsh world, that attacks anyone that stands against what we believe or seeks revenge for any perceived insult. We see it all the time on social media. Somebody says something that you don't agree with and it's just shut down and attacked. It's the strength to remain calm in conflict, compassionate under pressure. And it's about not shrinking back from truth, but holding truth boldly with tenderness. I'd love to just share a story about somebody who really embodies this meekness in amazing ways. Somebody called Amy Carmichael, who was born in Northern Ireland in the mid-1800s. And when she was 15, she gave her life to Jesus and decided that she was going to use the rest of her life to follow and serve him. And so when she was 27, she moved to Japan to become a missionary. And after not too long there, she got ill and had to move again because the climate there was causing her trouble. And so she, rather than giving up, she just decided, well, I'll go to Sri Lanka and be a missionary there. And so she shared the gospel there. And after some time there, she decided, actually, no, I think God's calling me to India. And so she moved to India in her late 20s and spent the rest of her life there. She spent her life at first traveling around, sharing the gospel, telling people about Jesus and leading people to him. And then after a little while, she was approached by a little girl asking for help. A little girl who it turned out had just managed to escape from slavery as a temple prostitute. And she saw this girl and her heart broke for her. And so she took her in and cared for her. And after Not long, a few days, four more children, young girls, came and found her and asked for help. And so she took them in as well. And after a few years, she had bought a house and was caring for 30, 40 young children that had all been, she had helped rescue from slavery in India. And after another 30 years or so, she was running this entire village that was a village of about 900 people, including several hundred children, a team of 50 to 60 helpers, a few doctors. But through all of this, she still suffered from her illnesses that she had caught, that she picked up. She had to deal with a lot of really horrible pain. But she never gave up. Through all of the setbacks and the pushbacks, she kept going. Rather than deciding to give up, she just trusted God and adapted what she was doing, but kept following what God was calling her to do. And then when she was 64, she had a serious accident and was left bedbound for the rest of her life. And despite that, rather than those injuries turning her to bitterness, she chose to keep trusting God. And from that place, she wrote this poem. She said, "Gone, they tell me, is youth. Gone is the strength of my life. Nothing remains but decline. Nothing but age and decay. Not so. I am God's little child, only beginning to live. Coming the days of my prime, coming the strength of my life, coming the vision of God, coming my bloom and my power." These are words that could only be written by somebody who clings tightly to the hope of resurrection in Jesus. She is an incredible picture of meekness. To trust and rely on God's strength working in her and through her despite her weaknesses, not allowing it to stop her or define her, not ignoring them, but trusting that God is bigger. Because of her illness and injuries, the world looked at her and saw weakness, but God saw faithfulness in her. Her strength wasn't freedom from pain, it was submission to God's will in the midst of it. Through that joyful surrender, God produced incredible fruit through her ministry and her life. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. The ones who let go receive everything. The ones who trust God rather than themselves will find themselves standing on solid ground when everything else falls away. And we can live this way because of Jesus. Only because of Jesus, because of his blood, because of all that he's done for us and given to us. Jesus Christ, the meek and lowly King, who created the heavens and the earth, all that is in them, with a word, who laid down that power, who surrendered himself completely, even to death on a cross, and who God raised and exalted to the highest place in heaven. He reigns over all things, and he calls us to walk with him in meekness, and he gives us the strength to do it. Amen.